The Great Debate Series. Best running back ever.
Greatest running back ever, best running back ever. This is so hard, right?
So hard.
This might be the hardest one we've ever done or will do.
Might be.
Because there are so many incredible candidates. You went first yesterday, Perloff, so I'll go first on this one today. I believe you went first.
Yeah, I think we're doing 2 categories a day. So you go first on the first one, and I'll go first on the second one.
Okay, love it. On-air production meeting. Awesome. So I will go first. The greatest running back of all time is none other than Barry Sanders. The 10 years that he was in the NFL, it was just 10 years of peak. That's it. Just peak the whole time. 153 games, 15,269 yards, 99 rushing touchdowns, 109 total touchdowns, averaging 5 yards per carry. That's more than Walter Payton. That's more than Jim Brown. That's what Barry was able to do, kind of like defying the laws of physics and gravity in some ways while he's playing running back. Now, the one thing about Barry that's hard, and our formula for this is always like a moving target. The lack of postseason success.
Yeah, that is true.
Difficult. It's really difficult. But I think for Barry, what matters most is that he wasn't playing for great teams and still was able to elevate in a lot of ways. And he wasn't on a juggernaut, and he wasn't on the San Francisco 49ers dynasty, and he wasn't in the Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty.
He sure wasn't.
He sure as hell wasn't. And so the fact that he could still be the greatest of all time despite playing on mediocre teams, I think only adds to this candidacy. He's a 2-time NFL MVP, 4 different seasons. He had the rushing title, a 6-time first-team All-Pro. And, there's a flash about Barry, just like when I talked about Deion Sanders yesterday with cornerback. There's an artistry. There was something artistic about what Barry was doing. Brutal, too, in a way, but artistic about what Barry did.
I know this is your choice, but can I just wait for a second? My favorite play is when there'd be a giant pile and Barry would go into it, and you're like, oh, he's tackled somewhere in there. And then, he pops out, and then it's an 80-yard run. Yeah. That's one of my favorite plays in the history of the NFL.
Let's hear Barry Sanders highlights.
Sanders.
Goodbye, hello, where are you? What a call. And that was what it was like to watch Barry. Now, it's funny that Saquon Barkley's in the news every day lately, but Barkley's doing like a Barry impersonation. He's just not doing it. It's just not as good. And he has that, he's said many times that Barry is his inspiration. And
he's a little bigger. Isn't he?
A little bigger, but a little bigger, but you watch him, and that's what he's doing.
Yeah, he's trying. No, I'm just saying, in my opinion, nobody could do that kind of crazy lateral movement that Barry did. But that does not make him the greatest of all time.
All right, go ahead.
I am going with the man who could do everything at running back. He could block. He could catch, or Barry could catch passes, but this guy could really catch passes. He could throw passes. He was the greatest citizen in the history of the NFL and has the Man of the Year award named after him. He is none other than Walter Payton, who ended his career as the all-time leader in rushing yards, all-time leader in all-purpose yards, all-time leader in touchdowns. Yeah, those have all been broken, but that's not my point here.
Yeah.
He was a football player's football player. Unlike Barry, who was incredibly quick and, sort of scattershot. You never know where he was going to go. Walter would run right over you, or he'd run around you. He could do everything as a running back. And I mentioned, I was in a YouTube poll last night. His runs, he's got part Earl Campbell, where he just runs over guys, and his jersey comes off, and you see his shoulder pad. Then he's got part Barry Sanders, where he can juke you, too.
Yeah.
Not only that, the dude's stiff-armed like crazy, which is a big plus. And he could actually fly like Michael Jordan. He sort of invented that jumping over the pile. He was a long jumper in college and flew over the pile for those short touchdowns. Great highlights of that. I think other backs have picked that up since. He was a little bit more of an all-around back than Barry, and he was just utterly sensational. One more thing I like about him, Barry did this too. Never celebrated a touchdown. Just handed it to the official because he's been there before. And that is the coolest, baddest thing you can do as a running back. I think, listen, I love Barry. We both admire Jim Brown so much. But if you're talking about all-around running back, it's Walter Payton.
Yeah. You didn't mention also Walter Payton, 3-time MVP to Barry's 2 MVPs. I'm giving you a little ammo here. But
Yeah. I don't think you judge running backs by MVPs, really. That's kind of feels like a quarterback stat. And even so, doesn't Peyton Manning have like 1 million MVPs?
Yeah, but that's now. Like back then when, I think running backs were winning them a lot.
Yeah, but I don't think but regardless, I don't think MVP is a really big deal for Walter Payton. I mean, listen, Walter Payton didn't win a Super Bowl till the end in '85, and famously, Ditka gave a goal line carry to Fridge Perry instead of Walter Payton. A lot of people were upset about that, but I think he retired. People forget he retired as undoubtedly the record holder and everything. There are more games, and numbers are just up in general. Otherwise, he'd still be at the top of a lot of lists. His legacy. This is more of your style, but like as a person, like does that count for him? The Man of the Year stuff. I mean, Barry's a pretty good dude too, so I'm not sure I'm going to go there.
Listen, we've had throughout this great debate series, we've had guys who are not exactly Saints have been making, not New Orleans Saints, but people who have not been Saints off the field have made it onto a few lists here or there. Maybe a little foreshadowing when we talk about inside linebacker. There might be somebody who went through some legal issues who may or may not be number one. But sure, why not? It always counts to be a good person.
Yeah, Walter Payton though, it's just magical. And if you never saw him, just like I would advise any young football fan, go back and watch Walter Payton highlights, watch Barry Sanders highlights, and also Jim Brown highlights. I think Jim Brown kind of hovers over this. It's a little different. Did you look at Brown as well?
I did look at Brown. I know Samter's itching to get in because he wants to stand up for Jim Brown. But just one quick thing though about Walter Payton and why I went Barry Sanders over Walter Payton.
Yeah, I know I know exactly where you're going to go. Wait, okay, I'm going to tell Samter what you're.
What?
I know the stat that is going to hurt Walter Payton.
Okay, well, Walter Payton had 110 rushing touchdowns to Barry's 99. So Walter Payton only had 11 more rushing touchdowns, but yet 57 more games. Like Barry was doing it at this incredible clip. Now, to your point, coaching decisions. Coming down to the goal line, you're not going to call your own number. That's a lot on coaching and things like that. And Barry wasn't on very good teams, so of course he was getting the ball. I don't count rushing touchdowns. It's like runs in baseball. They're meaningless. You should have gone. Walter Payton only averaged 4.4 yards per carry. Barry averaged 5.0. I know. Well, I said that in my whole Barry spiel.
I
said he had more yards per carry than Walter and Jim Brown. You didn't
mention Walter's number. Yes. I think actually we should double check it. I think Brown was right there too.
Yeah, Brown was 5.2 yards per carry. And Maggie was right. I am itching. If you look, and we talk about the...
Samter, the floor is yours.
The pro sports reference pages, and if it's a bold, that means you led the league in bold. Jim Brown was in the NFL for 9 years. He led the league in rushing 8 times. The one time that he didn't lead the league in rushing, he only had 996 yards. He led the league in touchdowns 5 times. He won 3 MVPs. MVPs mattered. 9-time Pro Bowl, 8-time All-Pro in 9 seasons. Every single year this guy was in the NFL, he dominated. And don't forget, he had 12,000 yards rushing. The first 4 years of his career, he only played 12 games a year. Then they upped it up to 14 games a year, and he still done. He had 1,800 yards in a 14-game season. So forget about all these stats that Barry Sanders is putting up and the beautiful runs and the great, juke moves. How many times did Barry Sanders get tackled behind the line of scrimmage because he's juking and jiving behind the line?
Okay, but
and then he got second and 13.
But those yards get taken away from your totals, and Barry's still retired with over 15,000 yards.
Sure, but we talk about winning and lack of postseason success. Maybe the lack of postseason success might have to do with the fact that the team was facing second and 13, second and 14, a lot more often than second and 6 and second and 7.
Detroit Lions.
Barry was the problem when they made it to the playoffs.
I'm not saying that he's the problem. I'm just saying that I would love to not have him get tackled behind the line as often as he did. Jim Brown was unstoppable.
Okay, but here's the thing, and I hate to sound like a little J.J. Redick on this, but who's tackling Jim Brown? A bunch of plumbers and firefighters. You go back to 1957, 1958. In the chat, they're saying Johnny Unitas needed a side gig. You're going back to, that's not what Barry was facing in the 90s when guys were making millions of dollars and the sport had evolved. I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of PEDs probably. The guys still under those gigantic shoulder pads.
That's true.
I'm saying the guys going against Barry were a lot bigger and stronger.
It was the 90s, so you were still geared up to stop the run. It's not like now where defenses really have to think more about the pass than they do the run. Still in Barry's era, you're still focusing in on the run. especially if you're playing the Lions.
Well, yeah, but actually not more so. I mean, the Lions had some big passing years with Barry. Remember, Scott Mitchell had a gigantic year, and they had a Herman Moore, a wide receiver. Chicago, Walter Payton was the best quarterback and best running back on his team. I mean, name a quarterback that Walter Payton played with.
Well, Jim McMahon.
Okay, yeah. I don't know him. But generally, though, he had famously the worst quarterback play in the history of the league. Chicago Bears are the death of all quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So everybody was
Justin Fields.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. Justin Fields should have ran when the Bears picked him. So Walter Payton had to do much more, and he was in the 70s when all you did was, at least in the 90s, there was such a thing as a passing game. 70s and 80s, Walter Payton was the entire franchise, much like Jim Brown. But Jim Brown, you know what? It was a different game. A lot of guys ran like crazy back then. I agree with Maggie. It was against inferior talent.